Welcome to the Modern Husbands Podcast, where any combination of Dr. Bruce Ross, Christian Sherrill, and Brian Page host national experts who share winning ideas to manage money and the home as a team. Today, we welcome Dr. Gary Barker. Dr. Barker is the CEO and co-founder of Equimundo and MenCare. Dr. Barker advises the UN, World Bank, national governments, international foundations, and corporations. He is an Ashoka Fellow and Voices of Solidarity Award winner. Today's podcast is a recording of our special event held on February 15th. Dr. Barker addresses questions such as how husbands can show their spouses they care, the dynamics of when wives earn more than their husbands, how fathers can overcome the obstacles of being caregivers, and how men can become closer with their loved ones. Enjoy the show. We have a host of great folks here to have a good conversation, and we are really thrilled that Dr. Barker is here to join us. I feel like that with a group this intimate, it's okay if you want to just introduce yourself, or I can introduce you if you like before we get started. I think we go ahead and begin. So for those of you who are unaware, Dr. Barker is a leading expert in understanding really modern masculinity and what that means. And what I feel like he's redefining what a man should be in a modern world in a way that is consistent with our vision at Modern Husbands. So for us, it was a real treat that he agreed to come today and lead a discussion about how it is that we can be better caregivers and better spouses by caring more in a modern way, in a way that resembles what we know is best for us as human beings, not necessarily what's has occurred over the decades that led to this. Also here is Dr. Frischman from the Journeyman, one of the co-sponsors, Ed Combs from Healthy Love and Money, and Paul Sullivan was instrumental in helping promote this. He is on a beach somewhere right now in South Carolina, so he could not make it. He's with his family. So without further ado, Dr. Barker, would you like to get started?
Sure. Great to see everybody. And anyway, honored, Brian, that you invited me to be part of the conversation. I'm looking forward to listening and learning as much as I may share.
Well, thank you. Okay. There we go. All right. So the way that the format is going to run tonight is the first 20 minutes, Dr. Barker is going to have a conversation that is kind of a version of a TED Talk that he gave in Atlanta, Georgia. So if you haven't seen that TED Talk, then you'll be listening to many of his key points right now for the first time. And if you have seen the TED Talk, then you're fortunate enough to be able to pick his brain after he's finished. And then Dr. Frischman, Ed, and I, and Paul Sullivan put our heads together, and we put some questions for Dr. Barker to answer following what he has to say. And then for the final 20 minutes, we wanted to open it up to everyone who made the call or made the Zoom to be able to interact and ask questions. And from the outset, the goal was for this really to be a conversation. And that was really important for Dr. Barker. And when I look around the room and see people who I know that see the world the way we do, we know that this is a space safe enough to have, an open and honest conversation and ask the kind of questions that we want answers to, that we otherwise would not be able to. So, as Dr. Barker is speaking, please feel free to think through any questions that you might have. You can direct message those questions to me if you like, or you can put them in the chat. And I'll be sure to ask those questions in the second half of today's discussion. Does anybody have any questions about the run of show or anything else before Dr. Barker begins? Okay. Dr. Barker, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Brian. The TED Talk is there, so I don't think I want to repeat that, but I want to step into this of why the question I will often get asked if I give a talk someplace is, how did you step into conversations around masculinities? How did this become my career? And I want to kind of I'll start with two things there and how it led me to ask the questions that I ask as a researcher and why I'm doing what I do as an advocate. I have my father was a social worker all of his life. My siblings both adopted. We had foster children for as long as I could, remember which toys that I played with. And it was his profession and his cause. And our dinner table conversation was often the things children need and the things that children needed who didn't have everything that I had as the biological child growing up in the household, which felt to me normal. Men talk about care. Men care about the well-being of others. They care about children. He didn't do a lot of hands-on care. He was the full-time worker in that topic outside the home, but his vocation was about care. He had been a scholarshiped university football player at the University of Idaho, and had dreams of being a professional football player, but got injured and switched his career to being a social worker. So, lucky us, lucky me, that's, the dad I got to grow up with of just men care. We do this. This is not a strange thing. He talked about some caseloads that he had where he was working on child support of some children whose fathers were not paying their share, and he'd knock on the door and kind of always reticent of what might transpire. And men often would ask him, why don't you get a real man's job? And my dad just always kind of shrugged that off. And he liked to tell that story of like, how could you not see this as a real man's job? That version of caring manhood clashed against some things that happened to me in high school and then in university. I tell this story in my TED Talk, which is when I was 17, I was present in my high school cafeteria when there was a school shooting. A young man in front of the cafeteria made sure he got all of our attention. He yelled at the boy who was standing in front of him, said, "You stole my girlfriend and you're going to pay." And he performed, and a version of masculinity shooting this young man as about 100 of us looked on. My high school offered kind of nothing in the way of support, sent us back to class an hour later. No support at all in terms of what we saw and experienced. This was in southern Texas. Presence of guns is out of control. And it was probably years later that I kind of was asked not only what happened, but how did I feel about what happened? How did you make sense of it? How did you and others experience what happened there? And it was along that journey that I worked many years with survivors of violence, but also began asking the question, what's the through line in this violence and an act of sexual assault that occurred on my university campus that almost nothing was done, and just the other incidents of violence that I had witnessed in my life. And in working with survivors, almost always the perpetrators of the violence were men. And we kind of, the amount of stopping to ask, what is it about manhood? How do we make men so? And how, if, the richness of human experience means that men can be caregivers, as my amazing dad was, and how do we make men who use violence? What's in that equation? And that question has, been my career-long conversation. And I've stepped into that with a sense of not believing male violence is inevitable, but believing that it's a distortion of our human nature. That as we are raised in households that love us and care for us and put our needs ahead of anything else, we learn and internalize a way of seeing that humans care for each other. It is we don't survive without it. And to understand that the violence that men carry out is a distortion of our true selves, not a biological destiny of what it means to be a man. And I think that's one thing to study it. And I had an amazing beginning of a 26-year learning journey when my partner and I decided to have a child. I was doing my PhD in developmental psychology, learning how babies evolve, how we raise boys, how do we become who we are, how do we become attached, what are the roles of different caregivers, men, women, others, and then you have a baby in your life, a real life one. My partner's from Brazil. Brazil has, for those of you who don't know, it's got 5 months of paid maternity leave. There's now a month paid paternity leave, but far more generous for mothers that we have in our country. Still no guaranteed national paid leave. And the conversation as I was doing my PhD, she was the full-time breadwinner, was, well, okay, now here we are in this far part of the world. All of our extended family was in Brazil or in Texas. And she said, who's going to stay home with our daughter? There was no real coin toss. There was a looking at me because she had to go back to work after 12 weeks. And I was there with this amazing creature going, what do I do now? Do I know how to care? Do I know how to do this? Do I know how to put aside all things around me and focus on the care of this human being? And stepping into, so one, just I could talk hours about that, but then also stepping out into the world, right? Going out with a stroller with her in a, with a baby bag and going to the pediatrician and feeling just how much the world said, you're a father. Where's the mother? You don't really know how to do this stuff, do you? The subtle and not so subtle ways. If I couldn't soothe her, the number of women who would all but sort of pull my daughter out of my hands if I was caring for her by myself. And, of course, I can't say that I necessarily knew how to do everything, but I think it was, how do we practice that care muscle? And so I would say I've had an amazing 26-year learning journey with my daughter and with my partner on how do we learn how to do this together? How do we learn to be emotionally responsive, to do the care? My career, our work is Equimundo has made lots of noise in the world. I've been traveling a huge amount, and really held accountable at home around, you're going out to talk to others about care. Are you practicing it here? Where are you? And I remember um, one very meaningful trip that I had combined two countries, and we were training and talking with policymakers and felt like this work is so important. And my 3-year-old daughter asked my partner, this is probably the longest trip I had been on since she was born. And she asked my partner, is daddy dead? And I kind of immediately went, you told her I'm not, right? She said, of course. But for a 3-year-old, you're a developmental psychologist, you might know that she needs to see proof of life. And a fuzzy picture on a Skype, which is what we had back then, might not be enough. So fortunately, I was working with some very amazing other men working in this space. And I said, I know I was supposed to stay for another week. I'm going home tomorrow. And here's why. And, I feel blessed of just having, a partner and a daughter who have held me accountable and also really, really supported this work. And we as an organization have for a couple of decades tried and experimented different ways of engaging men in conversations about being better men, living healthier ideas about manhood. And I think a lot of that space feels fraught of women not trusting us, of a feminist movement that thinks men should be around, but not always sure that we should be around, or if we're going to take up all the air in the room. And finding a way that kind of stepping into believing that accountability, if I'm held accountable, if I'm called out in a loving way, I step into the conversation with my arms open instead of crossed. I look up instead of down at my feet and feel like, okay, you're calling me in to be the better version of myself and to even forgive me at moments that I haven't been, the emotionally responsible in the room caregiver or partner or supervisor. Jose will say that's never a problem at work, but some others might. Just acknowledging, sort of being able to believe that accountability is a way that we get to be better as men, that it's a kind of calling us in. And that's really what I tried to end my TED talk on. I think there's been so much conversation of, is gender equality against men? Is it about men versus women? Can we actually care about men and also believe in gender equality? And I ended with the message that I thought it is by caring about men that we lead men to care, that it is how, as we feel cared for, and that's kind of the secret of developmental psychology, if you can boil it down to one thing, is a child learns to love if they are loved by one crazy about you human being. And that we use that very technical expression, crazy about you, to refer to a human who puts your interests and well-being over theirs. And that's really sort of the secret of attachment. We learn that as young children. If we learn that as young children, we pay it forward. And so anyway, I think if I can, if I think about what we do in our global MenCare campaign and how we're trying to make conversations about this, is we're holding up data to show the gaps, but we're really trying to tell a story that's based in empathy and that believes that our destiny as humans, male and female, is to care, that it is our human superpower. It's how we survived as a species. Our our cognitive ability to read the emotions of others both saved us when you thought a foe was going to break into your cave, but it also helps you read the other human and be able to understand their deep emotional life. And there is how we create compassion and empathy. And I think, how is it, I think our cause, and I want to stop here, is how do we teach boys to exercise that muscle? We're in a world where we're spending so much time and so many of our hours in gyms. We've got an outbreak of boys and eating disorders and body dysmorphia and bigorexia, as we're calling it, of boys wanting to be bigger, spending all this time of a worry about our bodies. Can be good stuff, but how do we help boys exercise this care muscle to say that's really your superpower? And I'll stop there for a moment.
So before we get to the scripted questions, I want to point out that when you began, Dr. Barker, discussing the situation that you were facing when you had your first child, and that situation caused multiple heads to move up and down, guys that can relate to that. And a couple of weeks ago, I had on Manisha Thakur, and she brought up a key question that is asked at all types of social functions. What do you do? What do you do? And it caused me to pause. And I realized that I have never answered that question by saying, I'm a loving father, I'm a loving husband.
Yeah.
I go directly toward this instinct to want to prove that I'm good enough through a profession, through earning power. I'm feeling like I'm being sized up. And I felt like that kind of encapsulated your story, kind of the beginnings of the struggles that a lot of men face when they want to be much more than what you do professionally.
Yeah.
So with that said, so one of the first questions that we discussed asking you is some men have historically been told that the best way they can show their spouse they care is by bringing home all the bacon.
Mm.
How can all husbands, including those who only bring home some of the bacon, show their spouses they care in other ways?
Yeah. I mean, I suppose this is such of all the things that have changed in gender relations in the last 20 years, this one is so sticky and hard to change. I was reading a New York Times article yesterday, came out on Valentine's Day, of how much even the youngest generation of women on a date with a guy expect him to pay. Um,
Mm,
and even, number of women in the workforce and kind of the normality of, women expected to be in the workforce, we still are stuck in this idea that kind of men's breadwinning. And it is hard to change because a huge amount of it is, these generations of inequality, right? That this was the way it is. Um, I mean, if I think of our generations, I think I'm a few years older than most of you, but you know, our dads were um, mostly at home, right? We are kind of part of this first and a half generation that's trying to switch this around. Working mothers, one generation ago, they were there, particularly for low income and lower middle income households where that was pretty common, but it was still, and the world was designed around you will work here, there's a union job for you maybe here, but it was men for the most part, except for some uh, exceptions certainly in moments like World War II, et cetera. But this is a really new thing for us to say. This is not the only thing we can do. I think a lot of men feel that we see what happens when men are out of work involuntarily, right? Just the depression, substance use, the deaths of despair that lots of researchers have been writing about, mostly because of the lack of job and purpose that comes with that. So how do we step into this? I mean, what are I think for a lot of working dads that maybe a household has decided that that's the way it's going to be, he's the main breadwinner, is trying to identify, a couple of meaningful things that you can do when you get home, a couple of meaningful things you're responsible for, and probably just, the need for a couple agreement that we're making peace with this, that this is, life circumstances probably made it so, not that we've got this endless choice. And so I think it does really require the couple to embrace, we're okay with this, and here's a few things that you can do as a meaningful way to be involved in it. I remember moments when I alluded to those long trips that I was on, how much I adored rushing from the airport, or stressful about rushing for the airport, because I wanted to make it home by bedtime so I could read a book to my daughter. Uh,
mm.
and some people would think, oh, isn't that amazing for your daughter? No, it was amazing for me. It was my moment of peace in a day. It was a moment of just that amazing, the smell of a young child, the energy, just the affection that's there. So, I think something like that also just hooks me in, that I want to do that. I demand to do that when I get home. That is my piece of the care work. If that's all I have time for, I like demand that to be mine. Whether could that be bath time? Could that be a morning time? I'm an evening person, but if you're a morning person, can you choose something in that routine, make it a bit of a ritual, make it yours? And you might have to, argue a bit with your partner of like, I need this. I might not be as good at, at it as you are, but like, this is my, 7 minutes in the morning with our child. Yeah, that would sort of be mine, and like, yeah, kind of fight about it in a good way.
I love how you framed that conversation with your spouse by saying, this is something that I want to do. This is for me. Um, I saw a comment in there earlier, we're not babysitters.
Right, exactly.
We're fathers, and we
Yes.
enjoy being fathers. So well put.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know, Ed, go ahead. You had a question.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Parker. I appreciate your time and thoughts this evening. And this question probably builds on some of what you've already said, but how can men handle any outside pressure or shame if their wife or partner is earning more money than they do? And you know,
Yeah.
the kind of the psychology, even maybe some of the brain science that might help us understand that um, what's
Yeah.
happening there. And I think this is a personal question because my value system says not a problem, but something in my brain says this is a big problem.
Yeah. That's where our social brain gets us in trouble, right? We are looking around and seeing the cues and seeing the looks. As Brian said, right? Your example of when people ask what I do, how often, how easy it is. It's like, well, let me give you the mini CV, or let me tell you the title. In fact, you
Right.
guys started off calling me Dr. Barker. Just, yeah, call me Gary. I mean, just right. You know, even that we step into that of just so automatic. I am what I achieve. I am what I earn. And, you know, our social brain is picking up everybody around us going, oh, because the guy over here has just talked about, you know, the promotion, this cool, whatever, new Tesla he bought with his cool job. And how does that work? And, you know, I think listening to men talk about this is how much you know, this kind of worry that I'm okay with it, but are my in-laws okay with it? Is my spouse okay with it? You know, I've heard men as well say, I wonder what my children will think. Will they think I'm a failure in the professional realm, and how will they make sense of that? What other competencies do I show? You know, I think it takes a lot of folks. It certainly takes a spouse, a partner who is part of, you know, valuing that, and is not only her, if it's a her, if you're in a heterosexual couple, but also, or him, if that were the case. Um, but also in other social circles of, if someone is to, you know, make you seem less than, that they become part of, hold on here, this is as valuable and important as anything we do in our household. And, you know, this was not a failure that he decided to do this. I think the importance that we've got our spouse has our back on that conversation. I think for a lot of guys, it also matters that you find other men in the situation to kind of go, yeah, I felt that too. You know, it was I was at home part-time. I told you at the beginning when my daughter was born. One of the first things I did, partly out of a panic, is like I found some other men who were in the same situation, just because I needed to go, one, I'm not really sure what I'm doing here. Emotionally, this is a journey, and I don't know really. I don't want to put all of it on my spouse, and sometimes I don't want to acknowledge to her how confused I am, and just some other guys in the same situation. So I think, you know, finding other men you can share that conversation with. And I do think that for a lot of us, it matters having something else. That one, it's exhausting. It is emotionally exhausting being a full-time caregiver. So obviously we need the space. And I think, you know, sometimes we need the space just to like relax and regenerate, and, you know, clean whatever off our shirt from whatever meal we were making before and whatever else is there. But sometimes also to like have something else that you feel sort of competent and gives you some meaning. You know, a part-time job, something you are writing. I think it's amazing the number of men now talking about their caregiving and making that their storytelling, and their narratives and their sharing, and, you know, finding meaning in that. So I think it's, you know, not put it all there. The spouse who supports, and I've always needed some other guys that I could go, does this piss you off or what? You know, just so we can, because it, you know, it doesn't work to kind of yell at your in-laws, right? Not very often anyway. So it's useful to, I don't know if that was helpful. I was just my trial and error and listening to some other men.
No, it was helpful. And I think for me, I almost felt some tears come up as you started to share that story, because, you know, I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, and when my first son was born, I was staying home. And, you know, the thing that I heard was like, oh, it must be nice to have a breadwinning wife.
Yeah.
Like totally, like not even about my experience. And then like there
Yeah.
were no other men. I was
Yeah.
going to play dates with my buddies' wives at their homes.
Right.
And then people were like, yeah, well, you know, there was always this mythical other stay-at-home dad that was not around. Like I
You
could never
never
quite
found.
find them. So
Yeah.
yeah. So
Yep.
I appreciate it. And
Yeah.
that's great.
See, you all are so kind and much sweeter than me. I've one time I had somebody kind of poke, my wife's now the breadwinner, and say something in not derogatory, but kind of the way that we're all speaking about. And I just looked at him. I'm like, yeah, it's awesome. You should have married one of those. You know how fun it is to play with your kids when they come home. And yeah, my wife's a rock star, you know, kind of like put it right back at him. Not sure if that's the appropriate way to handle it, but it felt good and caught him off guard. Brought pause to the conversation, that's for sure. Maybe some
It definitely
reflection.
You can definitely fall into the old macho style of not only is she the breadwinner, man, you should see how hot she is. No, but we don't go
Yeah,
there.
exactly.
But yeah, Brian,
I
I
didn't
think
want to say it, but that's what I did say. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I won the lottery. I don't know what you're giving me
and
grief
let me tell
about.
you what else, loser. Yes.
Yeah. So I promised Paul Sullivan I would ask one of these questions, and it's a very important question. And then Dr. Frischman has one after that. And so for those of you who are unaware, Paul founded the Company of Dads, and he sees himself as a lead dad, somebody that is a lead caregiver, that's a father, that's a man, and so that plays right into this type of conversation, particularly what Ed was just bringing up in his own experiences as a father. So his question is, what are the forces that stand in the way of fathers being accepted and accepting themselves as the lead caregiver in a family? And how can fathers work through them?
Yeah. Yeah, it's related, relates a lot to Ed's previous question. I mean, one is
Yeah.
just it's slowly, but still too slowly becoming normal. When my daughter was born and I was a part-time stay-at-home dad, and it was about a year, um, there were something like 7% of stay-at-home parents in the US were fathers. That number's increased. It's now about 20. So, we I don't know what the magic number when something becomes normal. I suppose in the gender equality space, we've said workplaces and particularly in politics and leadership, when it's 30% women, the norms begin to shift. Workplaces become accommodating to women's needs because there's enough to, it's not a strange thing. I don't know if that's a magic number about, about stay-at-home dads, but there is, as this become normal, I've had the chance to work with some colleagues in the Nordic countries who they've had this, they started in the 90s with about a 20%, and now they're probably, I'd have to look at the numbers, but probably achieving about a third. And it certainly helps when you have leave policies that offer equal amount of time. They don't do the primary and secondary caregiver stuff. So I think what Paul, thank you for the question, Paul, and what Paul's tried to work on is how do we at workplaces to see it as normal. And probably far more normal is this in and out, right? That we're going to have lives and careers that I'm the stay-at-home parent for this amount of time, and then you might be doing more of it because you're now doing grad degree or job X that moves us here. How do we, but I think, to see either one of us could step out of work and our careers should still be valuable if we want to go back to them. And I think I think it is about that normality, right? To see it happen at work, to see other men around you. We've also been looking a lot at the stories. We've done a study together with the Gina Davis Institute they've looked a lot at how women are presented in television, and we did a study together with them on how fatherhood and men's caregiving was presented on TV. And the similar tropes, right? So how do the stuff that where we get our stories and what becomes normal to us still tells all these deficit stories that this is kind of abnormal when men do it. I'm excited to see that we've got TV shows like This Is Us and some others that, have really amazing fatherhood stories and making normal men's care work. I think it's also just a shout out to, and if I've seen in the last 10 years or so, the number of blogs and podcasts, what you are doing here, posting so that, you plug in dads, fathers, and there's an amazing amount of stuff that comes up compared to 10, 15 years ago. And I think it's about showing your voice, telling the stories. This is normal. I am here. I'm doing this. I didn't cease to exist because I may mostly be inside or in the backyard and you don't see me at work. So I think just continuing to turn up this volume, and get the stories out there about the normality of it. Um, I was trying to think if there was any amazing father stories on this year's Super Bowl, right? It's just like, again, how do we, I don't remember any that, made me really think, hey, fatherhood shines through here. I remember that one years ago from Sprite, if you remember that one, where the the father's playing Pretty Pretty Princess with his daughter.
Oh, yeah.
and she's drawing makeup on him, and he's got all the stuff on, and two of his very, very masculine looking buddies knock on the door with a 6-pack to come watch the game. And they give him a once over, and he opens the door and kind of nods in of like, I dare you to question who I am and what I'm doing. So Brian, back to your, let's, some of this is kind of like, I dare you question that
Yeah.
this is a normal thing for us to do. Get on with it. And I don't want to get into, too much of that anger side, but partly it's like, shame on you that this is not normal. Just like deal with it. Go on, right? This is a normal way humans can organize our lives. So yeah, I think it's that combination of, changing the narratives out there with all of us who tell stories, keeping telling these stories. And it's kind of making it normal at work too. So maybe we have, less of there's work over here and there's this big membrane between it here. I could go into another television story. Do you guys watch Succession? Right?
Oh, yeah.
Which is kind of what the world tries to do to us, right? Like you're
Yeah.
inside underneath windowless place. You have no connection as a caregiver to the rest of the world. And then you come out and somehow, you're split into this other personality. That's a pretty good metaphor for how we treat our work lives. Like, how do we like break that membrane down and say, this is normal. We all have caregiving duties.
Yeah, kind of back to this, I don't want to say angry response, but it borders on anger. I also take it as a little bit of a backhand to my wife, like what
Yeah.
women can't be. My wife's really intelligent and
Yeah.
she's aspirational. What are you suggesting that women can't be that?
Yeah, exactly.
And I have to say there was one commercial that did a great job depicting fatherhood, and I this probably isn't good that I can't remember the name of the company who did it, but it was a makeup commercial. Perhaps that's why I wasn't paying attention to the name. But she walked in on her dad watching the Kansas City Chiefs, and you could hear Taylor Swift in the background, and she became interested. And then it showed at the end, the father bought her a Taylor Swift, the number 13 Kansas City Chief jersey. That's her favorite number. But what was so special about that commercial was that was a true story. It was a father and a daughter,
Oh,
and somehow he
cool.
had
Love
written
it.
in and talked
Yeah.
about how that brought them together.
Yeah.
So for the other folks who let's see, we've got Kate and Jessica and Michael. I want to make Jonathan, everybody has a chance to contribute. So I want to make sure you know that Dr. Frischman has a question. And then after that, I think it's easiest just to, raise your virtual hand, or if you don't know how to use the Zoom controls, just unmute yourself and begin asking questions. And if for whatever reason you don't have any that come top of mind right now, don't fret. We have backup questions as well. We're going to make sure that we take full advantage of this time. So, perfect. Jessica, please feel free to, you're next. After Dr. Frischman's up, you are next. Thank you, Jessica. All right, Dr. Frischman, go ahead and go with you. And then it is Jessica after that.
Awesome. And, similarly, it's just Jason most of the time. I always say the insurance company is the only ones who call me doctor these days. But yeah, thank you so much. I so appreciate your conversation around narratives and storytelling, because so much of the work I do is around the stories we tell direct the reality of our lives. And that is, we've had a lot of stories that have hurt, and, men and boys who hurt become hurtful men and boys. Right. And so, and I'm thinking so much about what you're talking about, and I joke often, it's not good marketing, but I joke that a lot of the men that I work with, the ideal man that I work with has hemorrhoids because they come home after a successful day of work and hide in the bathroom. And, so my question for you would be, what are some of the things and experiences that get in the way of men feeling safe and being open and vulnerable with the people they purport to love the most?
Yeah. I mean, I suppose that we spend a lot of years teaching boys not to be vulnerable and emotionally connected, right? Whether, at school, sports, suck it up, hold it in, get on with it. And obviously there are moments we have to, right? We are driving a car, we are facing a stress, we are responsible for somebody else. We've got to, we got to tough on through it. But there's so many moments in life where we don't sort of stop and say, that must have really been tough. Must really be tough to talk about. Like, how do we create safe spaces for sons in particular to have an emotional vocabulary? One of the, one of the kind of hit educational activities we use in our group workshops, and we do this with adult fathers or also with young men, is one where you just take an inventory and talk about how challenging it is or easy it is to express certain emotions: happiness, anger, fear, sadness. The kind of the easiest ones for men to express tend to be rage comes first, rage and anger, right? That I'm allowed to, and that I've seen a lot of other men's anger around me. Happiness sometimes comes second. And then the ones that require, kind of that are tough are sadness and vulnerability, the stuff that is about, I'm not so sure. And I think, how do we, I think, one thing I can say, why can't you do this, right? And I think a lot of the world thinks that, well, men have endless agency, that we can do it all, right? And that's part of, but this is one way we have to say, no, boys need instructions. And I say boy to mean any male human at any age across the lifespan in this case, that I think,
Absolutely.
adult men need, it takes some practice. How do you feel about that? It's okay. It's okay if you don't have words right now. Maybe it's tomorrow you want to talk about it. How can I, if you're threatened, if I'm sitting right in front of you, can we kind of, do the side to side thing where guys might be doing something together and 2 days later it might come out. I think just it sort of allowing that space. Now that's easy here while we're doing this. I've had many conversations with my spouse. I hope she's not hearing through the wall of like, would you tell me what you're feeling like now? Right. So, it's kind of easier to say that, but I think I think to treat it as a lifelong learning experience. I got to practice this. And I do find it quite useful. I've been working on this issue for a long time. I do a lot of work with other men. I find it really useful at times to be with a group of men, to be able to, and I really admire a group facilitator who kind of just has that, like, can just make you feel calm and go, I feel safe here that I can talk about it. And if I can talk about it here and kind of practice the words I'm going to use, that I can go into, whatever the conversation, or try to go into the conversation that I need to step into. So yeah, those are all my futile attempts. What do you do, Jason? Because I do it. It's a lifelong learning thing, and
It's, you used the word journey earlier. It is a journey for sure.
Thank you.
Well, I want to be sensitive to the time, and we have a closing question here for Dr. Barker. So the closing question is, what are 3 things that husbands can do who want to be better partners?
I think we kind of touched on most of them here. I mean, one is just, that emotional vocabulary that Jason just articulated, right? Just we have to be able to talk about this stuff and the stress and sort of pull ourselves out of the shield that we try to build as men, that we so often say, I don't care, that's not my deal, right? Just shut down. So one is just, I think, that emotional expressiveness, we got to learn it, we got to practice. It matters that we do the time. It is about the quality of the care that we do, but we also, need to be in the room and do it. There's moments it's not the fun stuff, and so I think just kind of reminding ourselves that there is also passion and great care that's found in those things that look like the dirty work. And I suppose third would be just letting go. I mean, the deep power of just let that shit go. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that I think just to stay together as couples and to remember the things that keep us together is just to let a lot of stuff go. And yeah, that's probably the one I would end on. It just takes um whether it's the amount of care work that somebody did, the Yeah, let it go.
Thank you for listening to today's special edition of the Modern Husbands Podcast, a recording of our February 15th event with Dr. Barker. Be sure to visit modernhusbands.com to learn more. Until next time, be well.